The U.S. is still maintaining its broken immigration policy, even during the administration of Democratic President Joe Biden. In the previous administration, the left-wing leaning media kept criticizing President Donald Trump for his crackdown on so-called illegal aliens, keeping children in cages, families separated, and trying to build a wall on the border with Mexico. Now, while the government is now safely distant from that media hype, not much has changed. Apprehending and removing undocumented immigrants who are considered a threat to national security and public safety of the U.S. continues unabated in a country claiming to be leader of the free world.
Immigration under Biden.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to We the People. I'm your host, Daniel Arya, and in this episode, we'll try to search for any end in sight on the issue of immigration, its victims and its enforcers, and broken policies creating the stalemate we are witnessing nowadays. My first guest in this episode will be journalist and author Daniel Lazar, and later on the show, I'll be joined by activist and commentator Don DeBar. Please stay with us as we delve into the ups and downs of the issue and do our best to shed light on how the situation could pan out for immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers in America.
Immigration has always been essential to America. Let's end our exhausting war over immigration. For more than 30 years, politicians have talked about immigration reform, and we've done nothing about it. It's time to fix it. On day one of my presidency, I kept my commitment and sent a comprehensive immigration bill to the United States Congress. If you believe we need to secure the border, pass it because it has a lot of money for high-tech border security. If you believe in a pathway to citizenship, pass it. There's over 11 million undocumented folks, the vast majority of here overstaying visas. Pass it. We can actually, if you actually want to solve a problem, I've sent a bill to take a close look at it.
Now, previously, we asked Mr. Lazar what he thinks the fact that migrants and refugee seekers' deaths at the U.S. southern border with Mexico has reached an all-time high. What exactly does that mean for Washington's continued claims of promoting human rights throughout the world?
Well, it certainly undercuts any U.S. claims to be enforcing human rights. The U.S. is pursuing extremely unjust policies with regard to immigration and internal economic development in the countries that are hardest hit in the Caribbean and in Central America. And the U.S., to a great extent, is actually causing these problems that it now is wrestling with.
The U.S. southern border continues to be the epicenter of crackdown on asylum seekers and refugees. But their plight extends further into the country, where they continue to face harassment and fears of deportation. Even those who have been on U.S. soil for generations and contributed to the country's well-being are not exempt from suffering.
There is no easy solution to migration because it's the interaction of different vulnerabilities. The violence, the lack of opportunities, the vulnerability to natural disasters.
The Biden administration has not offered any practical shift in the U.S. anti-immigration policies and basically continues pushing the same policies regardless of the Democrats' full control over the country.
Earlier, we asked our guest Don DeBar that given the profound instability in some of the Caribbean and Latin nations, how he thinks the fate of the refugee seekers and migrants is going to pan out.
The first thing is, what's broken and what's fixed and how is it supposed to function? Essentially, the immigration into the United States and into the European Union, also I assume into places like Japan and South Korea and Australia, places where there aren't wars being conducted right now and or death squads chasing people around. that those are magnets for people that are suffering the results of imperialism and U.S. foreign policy. People are being driven out of their homes because the conditions in their countries are intolerable as a direct consequence of colonial relations economically, imperial relations politically, and pretty much fascistic policies by the comprador governments that are placed in power by the U.S. and European colonial powers.
So hypocrisy prevails in U.S. politics as before, and the issue of immigration is no exception. Migrants keep being subjected to inhumane tactics such as Donald Trump's Remain in Mexico program. Now, Joe Biden had vowed to compensate families of children separated from their parents at the U.S.-Mexico border throughout the Trump administration, a pledge which remains to be materialized to this very day.
In balance, I would say that Trump's policies were maybe slightly worse, but the difference is really insignificant, and Biden has essentially pursued much the same policies. The problem is that the U.S. has devastated the Haitian economy. It has supported a coup d'état. It has encouraged the growth of drug gangs due to its highly punitive approach to the war on drugs, and at the same time, it forbids Haitians to immigrate. Now, the U.S. has pursued some of the same policies in Puerto Rico, which is also located in the Caribbean.
The Democratic president also keeps pursuing the Trump policy known as Title 42, which continues to return migrants to an uncertain future in Mexico. Officially called the Migrant Protection Protocols, the program has so far sent over 70,000 people to unsafe cities near the U.S. border in Mexico. Given profound instability in some of the Caribbean and Latin nations, how is the fate of the refugee seekers and migrants going to pan out?
Biden sent 7,000 of them back to Haiti, where they originated. But Haiti is a devastated country where crime is through the roof. Criminal gangs control the countryside. And in fact, it's so bad that American diplomats are forbidden to leave the embassy grounds because doing so is simply too dangerous. So that actually surpasses anything that Trump did. It was a major crime against humanity.
Title 42 expulsions are just the tip of the iceberg in the U.S. crackdown on immigrants. In his first 6 months in office, Biden has exceedingly used that authority and even broken Trump's record in the quest to suppress immigrants at the southern border. The U.S. government boasted about payments of around $450,000 to compensate the brutal family separation practice. But now it has not only changed that figure, but also cast aspersions on whether it would be paid at all.
Now, the crisis at the border is a telltale of the human rights situation in America. Putting kids in cages or so-called migrant facilities represents the depth of U.S. politicians' disregard for children who actually never chose to enter the country on their own. Now, the Trump administration was notorious for exercising zero tolerance at the U.S. border with Mexico. So what is the difference between the Trump administration and the current one in terms of dealing with migration at the southern border?
But primarily the media coverage. People are being sent back. You know, Obama was the great deporter. He actually sent back more people than Trump did by, I think, a factor of 2 or 3, I forget. Not just because of his 8 years to 4 years, but actually in terms of, per year. he sent more people back than Trump did. And Trump's numbers went down after securing the border in the first group under his administration, as opposed to the way it had been secured under Obama or Bush or Clinton.
The story of immigration into the United States has been laced with continuous reports of illegal crossings, detentions, and even murder and sexual abuse.
The situation facing people that leave a precarious situation in the Caribbean and Latin American countries are going to come to the United States and find also a precarious situation for themselves, with the exception of the compradors, the people that moved to Cuba, for example, after the Cuban Revolution, or the people that moved to Miami from Cuba, and the people that moved to Miami from Venezuela after 1998, the people that moved to Miami from Nicaragua, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those people do very well when they get here, or some of them do.
Now, whether or not they get in, most end up disillusioned at the conclusion of their journey. Life is certainly not pleasant for a large number of immigrants, no matter whether they enter the country legally or illegally, or those falling victim to gangs and cartels on the way. What do you personally think is next in the fight for immigrants' rights, and where do you see the U.S. government heading in dealing with this issue?
If there was some way to organically connect working people in the world, communicate directly with each other, and someone asked me this question knowing that it might be an input into the policy of people around the world, I would say, first thing that has to happen is that workers in every place, whether they're in the United States or in Honduras or in Haiti or in Africa or in Belgium, have an interest that is distinct from that of the elite. None of us have an interest that identifies with the elite. And so where we find ourselves ignoring what the elite is doing to people of the places I just mentioned, then we are already going to lose.
Republican politicians keep linking immigration into America to rising crime rates in the country. In fact, speaking about the issue, which is often laced with racism, is a talking point for the GOP officials to score political points ahead of the 2022 midterms and the 2024 presidential election. This is while U.S. imperialist policies have been touted as the main cause for Central Americans' struggle for decades, which has led to influx of migrants at the border.
The claim by one party over another to be concerned about the deaths of migrants and to be concerned about the lives of migrants, the lie is given to it by these statistics. These numbers have been pretty much constant, within certain fractions on one side or the other, no matter if it were George Bush, or Barack Obama or Donald Trump as president, regardless of all of the rhetoric that goes around the issue.
Now, the federal government and states such as Texas are meanwhile locked in fierce battles over the number of arrivals at the U.S.-Mexico border, by which southern states are immediately affected. How do you think the more progressive factions of the Democratic Party should react to the Biden administration's deportation of Haitians?
They should react not only by opposing deportations, but demanding comprehensive reform of U.S. economic policies, military policies, drug war policies, et cetera, in the Caribbean and in Central America. But they are not going to do that. They're just way too weak and way too narrowly focused to do anything like that. But that's what's needed, though.
Biden created a task force after taking office to address some of the brutal policies of the former presidents. Yet a whole lot of the pledges are still blowing in the wind. Trump administration's zero-tolerance policy may have officially ended, but not much hope is in sight for families of migrants as the more sophisticated anti-immigration practices persist. Crossing the border illegally, meanwhile, remains the final solution for people escaping violence, poverty, and insecurity in certain countries of Central and Southern America.
Biden's policies are very bad. Biden represents a continuation of the policies of the last half century, which have had a devastating effect on the Caribbean, on Central America, et cetera. Not only has the U.S. supported dictators and coups, et cetera, but the U.S. economic policies have also had a devastating consequence. For example, Haitian agriculture has been destroyed by cheap U.S. imports. And Haiti essentially is not allowed to impose any kind of import restrictions due to intense pressure from U.S.-controlled agencies like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank.
Hoping to reach a land where so-called human rights are promoted on a daily basis, refugees are confronted with an iron fist. So where do you think the American public stands about the Biden administration's handling of migration, given the fact that the nation was built by slaves and migrants in the first place?
Upon a genocide. First, they had to clear the land of the people that lived here. And then they had immigrants come. Some were, induced or enticed into coming in one way or another. And others were just captured and dragged over here in chains. There's no question about the moral basis of opposition to immigration being, bad. There is no moral basis for it. Certainly no moral basis for anyone in the United States outside of the people who are indigenous to this continent. But it's a more complex problem than just saying that this group is right for saying immigrants should have free access in and out of the country, and this group is wrong for saying that they shouldn't. Because what in fact has happened is that you've had an attack on the people outside of the country in various nations. In Central and South America, we're talking about here primarily in the Caribbean, but this has been going on in Africa and Asia as well. And
the issue of immigration, like many other issues, has been extremely politicized. Trump once said that he proudly gave secure borders to Biden despite the current situation. He even suggested that he created a smooth-running system on autopilot at the border, which Biden has now broken.
Well, I see the U.S. government heading towards more and more repressive measures and doing nothing, absolutely nothing, to reform its economic, military, and drug war policies in the Caribbean and Central America. I see absolutely nothing happening there. I only see a worsening, in fact. And so, therefore, that means there will be more human suffering, more desperate people on the Texas border fighting to get in, more kids abandoned, just more human horror stories.
Trump's anti-immigration policy was a centerpiece of his 2016 election campaign and is now a major issue as he seeks re-election in 2024. On the other hand, the current presidents appear to have been designed to keep both camps happy. But what about the rights of actual humans amassing at the border? No one really seems to care.
From now on, we have a new segment in our program titled Power to the People by Abbas Montagem. Let's watch the first part.
Peace, what's going on? My name is Abbas Montagem, and I'm super excited to introduce this new segment of the show called Power to the People. On Power to the People, we're going to be examining the racism that is ingrained throughout this country, right? And if we want to fully understand racism, we have to understand the vehicle that racism has been driven through is settler colonialism, right? So on this episode, we're going to get a full understanding as best as we can in the next few minutes of what settler colonialism is as an ideology, as a practice, as a colonial practice of domination, subjugation that enacts genocide against indigenous peoples as well as African peoples, right? So the foundation of this country is a settler colony, meaning a foreign people, right? A foreign people from the land, people that the land has no right to, came. In this case, the Europeans came from all over Europe, came to America, enacted genocide on the indigenous people, stole their land, brought with them diseases, rape, pillage, some of the most inhumane crimes against humanity is what the Europeans did to America, right? This is why we call them Euro-Americans, because they are Europeans who came and created America, which has no legal or human right to exist based off of genocide, right? Because this is what it is. It's a genocidal country that was founded through the most terroristic acts against humanity. Through settler colonialism, the Europeans stole the land from the indigenous people. And also, they stole Africans, they stole us, they stole our people, right? They stole our people from the continent, our ancestral homeland, and forced us to come to the South. Forced us as slaves to come to the South. And it's very important to note that African peoples, we have been resisting ever since the first European came to the continent. Ever since the first European came to the continent, we have resisted the genocidal conditions that the Europeans have tried to bring to our continent and to ourselves as people, right? But we were enslaved in the South through settler colonialism. They brought us as people, as a colony, as a nation of people, as different nations of people, to a colony in the South, and there we have the plantation. So if we want to understand the foundation of American capitalism, if we want to understand the foundation of American settler colonialism, if we want to understand the foundation of American racism, it goes back to settler colonialism and the slave trade and slavery, right? Through slavery, America has become the biggest purveyor of violence. They not only enacted violence on the plantation, but they subjugated us to the economic rule of that, right? What does that mean? That means that our bodies was the biggest amount of capital. Our bodies, before the so-called dollar even existed, our bodies is what existed as capital, right? So the value of slaves was roughly 3 times greater than the total amount invested in banks, and it was equal to about 7 times the total values of all currency in circulation in the country. 3 times the value of the entire livestock population, 12 times the value of the entire US cotton crop, right? And 48 times the total expenditure of the federal government that year. Our bodies. People talk about the New York Stock Exchange. We were the first people traded on the New York Stock Exchange, not stock, we were the stock. Our bodies was a stock. Our people was a stock. Our languages was a stock, forcing us to do the labor of this country, to expand this country, right? To expand it to what we know as the so-called 50 United States of America. Banks such as Wells Fargo own slaves, own slaves as collateral. The foundation of this banking system in America goes back to the enslavement of our people, where these lazy Europeans didn't work and forced us to work through subjugation of the most crimes. These are some of the biggest crimes against humanity, and it must be understood as such. This is the foundation of the economy, and we must understand that the foundation of this economy was our lives, where cotton was the leading American export from 1803 to 1937. What we were forced to pick, cotton, the leading American export. What does that mean? Now, this country is getting rich, is getting wealthy, developing the wealth to then now have more advanced weapons because they enslaved us. They exterminated, they made attempts to exterminate the indigenous people, and they forced Africans through slavery to produce the economics of this country. All this wealth now is used to fund imperialism and to strengthen the military. So if we understand settler colonialism in America, we understand that also Israel, the regime of Israel, has no right to exist. The regime of Israel has no right to exist. It in itself is another settler colony, right? That's why when we connect these dots between what's going on here in America and what's going on in the legal Zionist Israeli occupation, we see that the Americans, right, the Euro-Americans, the colonizers, the slave owners, right, they're the ones helping fund the Iron Dome. This is by no mistake, right? So we connect these issues with the issues of freeing Palestine to freeing the land here from Euro-American control. So my name is Abbas Muntakim. Hopefully y'all got a better understanding of what settler colonialism is. And the next episode, we're gonna talk some more. So this is Power to the People, Press TV. I'm Abbas Muntakim. Tap into the next episode.
Thank you, Abbas, and thank you, viewers, for watching the program. I'm your host, Daniel Arya, and make sure you tune in next week when we come back with another episode of We the People. Thanks for joining us, and bye-bye for now.